I kept checking my phone like it was going to tell me something different. 7:14 p.m. She was supposed to be here at 7. I'd already moved my water glass twice, straightened the silverware I wasn't going to use, and smiled politely at the hostess who walked by for the third time. She knew. Of course she knew. There's a specific kind of pity a restaurant hostess reserves for a man sitting alone at a table for two with a small white carnation on it because his coworker told him, "It'll help her find you." It's romantic. It was not romantic. It was a carnation. I looked like I was waiting for a funeral. Her name was Callie Voss. That's all I knew. Callie Voss, 32, works in pediatric occupational therapy over at St. T. Matthews, and apparently, according to my coworker Pete, who'd been relentlessly optimistic about my love life since his own wedding. She's exactly your type. I didn't know what my type was. I wasn't sure Pete did either, but I was 34. I hadn't been on a date in 11 months, and I'd said yes before I'd thought it through. 7:17 p.m. I started doing the math in my head. 5 more minutes. I give her 5 more minutes. That felt reasonable. That felt like a number a person with self-respect would land on. Not 10. 10 was desperate. 5 was measured. 5 was a man who had somewhere else to be, even though I didn't have anywhere else to be. I had leftover chicken tikka masala at home and a half-finished documentary about the Alaskan crab fishing industry. 7:19 p.m. I picked up the carnation and looked at it, put it down, looked at the door, and then the door opened. She came in fast, like she'd been running, which she had been. I could tell from the way she was catching her breath. She was wearing a yellow jacket that was slightly too big for her dark hair a little damp at the temples, and she was holding the hand of a small boy who could not have been older than 5 or 6. He was wearing a Dinosaur backpack and had a juice box in his free hand, and he was looking around the restaurant with the calm, deliberate focus of a very small scientist surveying a new environment. She spotted me. I don't know how. I wasn't standing, I wasn't waving, but she looked directly at me, walked directly to me, and stopped at the edge of the table. "You're Nathan," she said. Not a question. "Yeah," I said. She exhaled. "I'm so sorry. I'm Callie. This is Owen." She looked down at the boy. He was supposed to be at my mom's, but she had a thing and I couldn't find anyone last minute, and I completely understand if you want to. "Sit down," I said. She blinked. "Please," I said. "Sit down, both of you." Owen was already looking at the carnation. He was autistic. Callie told me quietly after Owen had settled in with the children's menu and a set of crayons the waiter had appeared with seemingly by magic. "Level 1, she said. Though she followed that with a small laugh and added that labels didn't really capture Owen, that Owen was sort of his own category. "He doesn't usually do well in new places," she said. "Loud ones especially. He'll tell me when he's overwhelmed." "How does he tell you?" She looked at him. He was coloring a cartoon fish the deep determined blue of someone who had made up their mind about that fish. "He taps my wrist twice," she said. "That's our signal." I watched him color. "That's a good system. We worked it out together. When he was 4. She smiled, but there was something tired behind it. Not unhappy. Just tired the way people are when they've been holding something big for a long time and have made their peace with the weight of it. "He came up with the tapping part." "Smart kid." "Terrifyingly smart," she said. "He knows every dinosaur by its Cretaceous subperiod. I can't name 5 off the top of my head and he corrects me constantly." I laughed. It was an actual laugh, not a polite one. She looked a little surprised, like she'd been braced for something else. We ordered. Owen got mac and cheese, which he examined carefully before eating, starting with the pieces on the left side of the bowl and working methodically to the right. Callie got the salmon. I got the chicken because I couldn't think straight enough to read the menu properly. She told me about her work, occupational therapy with kids under 10, mostly focusing on sensory processing and fine motor development. She said it with the quiet steadiness of someone who has never once confused their career with their identity, but also genuinely loved what they did. She talked about a little girl who had spent 4 months refusing to touch sand, and then, one Tuesday in March, just walked barefoot into the sensory bin and stood there like she owned it. "I cried," Callie said, "in the hallway after. Full ugly cry." "You hid it in the hallway?" I have a professional reputation to maintain. Sure, I said. In the hallway. She pointed at me with her fork. Don't. I held up my hands. Owen looked up from his bowl. He looked at my hands. Then he looked at me. It was the first time he'd looked directly at me since they sat down, and there was something very focused and very serious about it. Not unfriendly, just assessing, like he was running some kind of internal calculation I wasn't privy to. Then he went back to his mac and cheese, starting a new row from the left. He looked at you, Callie said quietly. Is that good? She picked up her wine glass. He doesn't usually look at new people. Not the first time. I found out more as the evening went on. Owen's father had left 2 years ago. She said it without drama, the way people do when they've had enough time to drain the emotion out of a sentence that used to have a lot of it. His name had been Patrick. He'd said he loved her, but hadn't said anything about being ready for what their life actually looked like. And when Owen's diagnosis came in, Patrick had stayed for 5 months and then hadn't. He sends birthday cards, Callie said, which is generous of him. The sarcasm was surgical. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be. Owen and I are fine. We have a good thing. She glanced at him. He was now drawing something on the back of a children's menu. She'd asked the waiter if that was okay, and the waiter had said yes in a way that suggested he would have agreed to almost anything she asked. We figured out how to be a team. What does Owen think about? I stopped. About this? She raised an eyebrow. About me dating? Yeah. She was quiet for a second. He doesn't really understand the concept yet, which is fine. I'm not introducing anyone to Owen unless it makes sense. Unless it's real. She said the last part carefully, like she was drawing a line, making sure I could see it. That's smart, I said. It's necessary, she said, not unkindly. Just true. Around 8:30, Owen looked up from his drawing and tapped Callie's wrist. Twice. She didn't miss a beat. Okay, baby, she said. She looked at me. We should. Of course. I was already reaching for the check. Let me. Nathan, you don't have to. I want to. I meant it. I don't know exactly when in the evening I'd started meaning it, but I did. She let me pay. She thanked me once, which felt right. Not 0 times, not 3. We walked outside into the early October cold. The street was lit up orange. Some store down the block had gotten an early jump on Halloween, and Owen stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at a string of lights shaped like pumpkins and was entirely still for a moment. He likes lights, Callie said. Yeah? Yeah. We once spent 40 minutes in the Christmas aisle at Target. Was that terrible? She thought about it. No, she said. Actually, no. It was sort of nice. Owen turned around and looked at me again. That same careful look. Then he held up his drawing. I leaned down to see it. It was a person. A stick figure, but a deliberate one, with a circle for a head and 2 lines coming down for arms. And next to it, another stick figure, smaller, with a triangle skirt that was clearly meant to be Callie. And a tiny one, even smaller. The 3 of them were holding hands. I didn't say anything for a second. Owen, Callie said softly. There was something careful in her voice. Who is that? Owen pointed at the big stick figure. Then he pointed at me. Callie looked at me. I looked at her. Thank you, Owen, I said. He zipped up his Dinosaur backpack and took his mother's hand. She texted me that night at 10:52. He asked where you went. And then, after a pause, that's never happened before. I stared at that for a long time. I typed back, tell him I went home. But I'd like to see you both again if that's okay. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice. Then I think we'd like that. Our second date was 2 weeks later. Her mother, Carol Voss, came through this time, so it was just the 2 of us, a wine bar near her apartment in Buckman, the kind of low-lit place where the bartender knows the difference between Burgundy and Bordeaux and doesn't make you feel bad for not knowing. We talked for 4 hours. I found out she'd grown up in Wisconsin, had wanted to be a marine biologist until she was 14, and then switched course completely, loved true crime podcasts and immediately felt guilty about loving them, and could not under any circumstances eat cilantro. I told her I was a high school history teacher. She said, that explains a lot. I asked what it explained. She said, the patience. I'm not that patient, I said. You waited for us at that restaurant, she said. You didn't leave. You weren't that late. I was 19 minutes late with a 6-year-old and a dinosaur backpack. To be fair, I said, the dinosaur backpack was not the issue. She laughed. It was a laugh that started in her chest and worked its way up, genuine and a little loud for the room, and she immediately covered her mouth with her hand, which made it funnier. I met her brother, Gordon Voss, about a month in. He was not particularly pleased about me. Gordon was 2 years older than Callie, built like he played linebacker at some point, and never quite decided to stop. And he had the particular energy of a man who had appointed himself the emotional infrastructure of his family and was serious about the job. He worked in commercial contracting in Portland, coached his son's Little League team, and looked at me across Callie's kitchen table like I was a load-bearing wall he wasn't sure about. So you're a teacher, he said. High school history, Lakewood, over on Canyon Road. Good school. I like it. What do you do in the summers? It was not really a question about the summers. It was a question about whether I was serious, whether I had ambition, whether I was the kind of man who would stick around when things got complicated. I understood that. I didn't resent it. I probably would have asked the same thing. I coach a summer program for kids, I said, at the community center. It's a reading and writing thing for middle schoolers who fell behind during the year, mostly because they were going through something hard at home. Gordon looked at me. Unpaid? He said. Mostly. There's a small stipend. He picked up his coffee cup. Put it down. Callie says you've met Owen? A few times. And he drew a picture of me on a restaurant menu, and I've thought about it approximately every day since. Gordon was quiet for a moment. Callie had gone to get something from the other room, and the kitchen was just the two of us and the refrigerator hum. He doesn't draw people, Gordon said. Usually, he draws dinosaurs and volcanoes, and once he drew a very detailed cross-section of a hot air balloon. Yeah, she mentioned he was particular. He's specific, Gordon said, and there was a clear correction in it, not unfriendly, just precise. The way people talk about someone they love when they want you to get the word right. He's specific, I said. Gordon nodded once. It wasn't easy. I want to be clear about that because I think the version of this story where it's easy is a disservice to both of us. Callie had walls, not walls she was hiding behind. Walls she'd built because she'd had to. Because when you're the only constant in a child's life, you have to be careful about what you let in. There were nights she pulled back. There were weeks when her schedule, Owen's therapies, her own long hours, her mother's health stuff, left almost no space for anything else. And I would go 3-4 days without seeing her and have to remind myself that absence wasn't withdrawal, that it didn't mean what it had meant in relationships before. I wasn't perfect either. I'd been alone long enough to have my own habits, my own silences. I had a tendency to go quiet when I was processing something instead of saying so. And Callie told me early, and kindly and directly, that silence read to her as disapproval because that's what it had been with Patrick. So I learned to say I'm thinking instead of going still. Small adjustment, big difference. Owen and I found our thing slowly. It started with dinosaurs. I bought a field guide to the Cretaceous period, which is the kind of sentence I never expected to write in my life. And I studied it with the same rigor I applied to AP US history, which is saying something. The first time I correctly identified an ankylosaurus without prompting, Owen looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as reluctant respect. Like he'd hoped I wouldn't figure it out so he could keep holding it over me, and now he had to recalibrate. After that, he started showing me things. Small things. A Lego structure. A cloud that looked like a specific dinosaur. A fact about a volcano he'd read in a library book. He'd come stand next to me and just start talking. No preamble, no establishing context, just launching directly into the information. I learned to receive it the same way. Just listen. Respond seriously. Don't redirect. The hard part came around the 4-month mark. Callie's mom, Carol, had a fall. Nothing catastrophic, a fractured wrist, some bruising, but it was enough to rearrange everything. Carol had been the primary backup for Owen, the person Callie called when work ran long or when she needed an evening to breathe. And suddenly, that net was gone. Callie absorbed it without complaint, but I could see the weight of it on her. She got thinner in the face. She stopped laughing at her own jokes, which I'd come to understand was a bad sign. I didn't ask. I showed up. I brought food on Tuesday nights, Nothing complicated, just things that we heated well, the kind of cooking that says, I thought about you this afternoon rather than I need you to notice this gesture. I adjusted to her schedule without making a thing of it. When she apologized for canceling twice in a row, I said, Callie, I'm not counting. She looked at me for a second. Patrick used to count. I'm not Patrick. She nodded slowly like she was filing that away. The night Carol got home from her sister's place, where she'd been recovering, Callie called me at 11 p.m. I picked up immediately. She didn't say much. She was just tired, she said. She just needed to hear a calm voice. I talked to her for an hour about nothing. The documentary I'd finally finished about the Alaskan crab fishermen, a funny thing a student had said in third period. The way the maple tree outside my apartment building had gone almost aggressively orange that week. When she fell asleep on the phone, I stayed on the line for another 10 minutes just to make sure. Gordon came around gradually, in the way that men like Gordon do, not with a speech or an announcement, but with small acts of recalibration. He started making eye contact across rooms instead of around me. He texted me once when Lakewood won their district history bowl, because apparently his son had told him, and apparently Gordon thought I'd want to know. He probably did not know that I would stare at that text for a few minutes, quietly grateful. The moment I knew it had shifted was at a birthday dinner for Carol in December, 3 days before Christmas. Her kitchen was packed. Gordon and his wife Sandra, their 3 kids, a neighbor of Carol's named Miriam, who talked exclusively about her hummingbird feeder and was completely wonderful. And Owen was sitting next to me because he had decided, somewhere in the preceding weeks, that sitting next to me at loud family gatherings was a viable coping strategy. He had his noise reduction headphones around his neck, not on. He only put them on when it got to be too much, and he was eating Carol's mashed potatoes with the systematic focus of a person who takes mashed potatoes seriously. At some point, Gordon leaned across the table and said to his daughter, "Ask Nathan, he knows history stuff." His daughter, who was 8 and deeply skeptical of adults, asked me why we have Thanksgiving. I gave her the actual, complicated, not the pretty version answer, adjusted for an 8-year-old. And she stared at me and then said, "That's not what my teacher said." "Your teacher probably told you the parts that fit in a paragraph," I said. She considered this. "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied. Gordon caught my eye and gave me the smallest possible nod. On New Year's Eve, Callie and I stayed in. Owen was with Carol, who had healed up fine by then, and we ordered Thai food and watched a movie neither of us really paid attention to because we kept talking over it. Around 11, she turned to me and said, almost casually, "I think I love you." She said it like she was reporting a fact she'd been sitting on for a while and had finally decided to release. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah." She pulled her knees up on the couch. "I wanted to say it before midnight so you couldn't think it was just the moment." "It wouldn't have been just the moment." "I know. But I wanted you to know I meant it on a random Tuesday level, not a fireworks level." I looked at her. "I love you, Callie." "Okay," she said. And she smiled. And then she leaned into my shoulder and we watched the last 40 minutes of a movie I couldn't name for you now if my life depended on it. Owen asked me, sometime in February, if I was going to live at their house. We were building a Lego Triceratops, which had 57 steps and a rotating head mechanism that neither of us fully understood. "What made you ask that?" I said. He pressed a piece into place. "You're here a lot." "I am," I said. "Duncan at school says when someone's at your house a lot, they either live there or they're a ghost." I looked at him. "Duncan sounds like a philosopher." "He's kind of annoying," Owen said, "but sometimes he says smart things." I handed him the next piece. "Would it be okay," I said carefully, "if I was here a lot? Just here a lot. Not necessarily living here, but around." Owen thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "You'd have to know more dinosaurs," he said. "I'll study," I said. "There are a lot." "I know." He picked up the instruction sheet, turned it exactly 90 degrees, and showed me step 23. "This one's the hard part," he said. "I'll help you." I proposed to Callie on a Sunday afternoon in April. No restaurant, no audience, no elaborate setup. We were walking along the Springwater Corridor Trail, the one that runs along the Willamette, and the air was that specific Pacific Northwest spring that's cool and green and smells like something just started growing. And I stopped walking, and she stopped walking, and I stopped walking, and I said, "I want to do this with you. All of it. Every complicated, exhausting, wonderful Tuesday of it. She looked at me. Are you? I pulled out the ring. It wasn't enormous. It was a simple band with a small oval stone, warm-toned, the kind of ring that could be worn every day, including the days you're wrist-deep in an occupational therapy sensory bin. I'd asked Gordon quietly whether he thought Callie would want something simple or something significant. He'd looked at me and said, "Those aren't different things for Callie." So I'd looked for a ring that understood that. "Yes," she said, before I'd even finished the sentence. "Yes, Nathan." She held out her hand and it was slightly shaking, which I will remember for the rest of my life. Owen took the news with the measured consideration of someone who had suspected this development and had already arrived at a position. "So you're staying," he said. "I'm staying," I said. He nodded. Then he went back to his Lego volcano. 3 minutes later, he came back and stood next to me and said, "I have 51 dinosaurs in my room. You can look at them if you want." I followed him down the hall. He lined them up on his shelf, carefully, in an order I didn't immediately understand, and told me the name of each one and the period and one specific fact. Like a formal introduction. Like he was giving me something. When he was done, he looked at the shelf and then at me. "Okay," he said. "Now you know them. Some things don't need the words around them to be exactly what they are. I knew them, and I was home." I think about Owen's drawing a lot. 3 stick figures, holding hands. Him, Callie, and, without anyone asking him to, without anyone suggesting it, me. He was 6 years old and he already understood something I'd spent years getting wrong. That the people worth staying for are the ones who make room for you without being asked. Not because it's convenient. Not because they owe you anything, but because something in them recognizes something in you, and that recognition matters more than the timing ever will. I didn't show up to that dinner expecting any of this. I showed up because I was 34 and a little tired of eating leftovers alone, and my coworker Pete was relentlessly optimistic. That's the honest version, but here's what I've come to believe. The honest version of why we show up rarely has anything to do with why it ends up mattering. What changed everything wasn't a grand gesture. It was a series of small choices, staying at the table when I could have left, not making Callie feel like a burden for running late with her son, learning the difference between a triceratops and an ankylosaurus because a 6-year-old had decided I was worth testing, saying I'm thinking instead of going silent, because silence had hurt her before and I didn't want to be another person who hurt her the same way. Character isn't what you do when it's easy. It's what you do on the random Tuesdays when nobody's watching and there's no reward for it. I brought food on Tuesday nights not because I wanted Callie to notice, but because I thought about her on Tuesday afternoons, and I wanted her to know that. That's the whole thing. That's the entire foundation of it. And it required something I don't think gets talked about enough, the willingness to stay uncomfortable while you figure things out together. Callie had walls, not because she was difficult, because she'd been let down and she was protecting her son, and both of those things were completely reasonable. Working through that, not around it, was the only path that was ever going to lead anywhere real. Gordon's suspicion. Owen's careful assessments. The weeks when Callie's schedule left no room for me, and I had to trust that absence wasn't the same as pulling away. None of that was easy. All of it was necessary. I think what I learned, and I mean actually learned, not just understood in theory, is that the life you want on the other side of fear requires you to be smarter and steadier than the fear itself. Smart enough to read a situation correctly instead of reacting to how it looks on the surface. Steady enough to keep showing up when showing up doesn't come with any guarantees. Owen lined up 51 dinosaurs on his shelf and introduced me to each one. He gave me their names, their periods, their one defining fact. He did it with complete seriousness, the way you would introduce someone to the people who mattered most to you. I was a stranger 7 months before that, a stick figure on a restaurant menu. And then, because enough small, honest choices had been made, by both of us, by all 3 of us, I wasn't anymore. That's the whole lesson, not a complicated one, just a true one.